I stood there, hammer in hand, driving the last cedar post into the ground, the scent of fresh cut wood mixing with the familiar tang of Texas earth. It was a crisp October morning, the kind where the air feels clean and the sky stretches wide over the rolling hills my family has called home for 3 generations. My daughter, Emma, had been pestering me for months about getting goats, her 12-year-old enthusiasm a bright spot in the shadow of grief that still lingered since losing my wife, Sarah, 2 years ago in a car accident. I could still see Sarah in my mind's eye, walking these same hills with me, her hand slipping into mine as the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. Those memories made every inch of this land sacred, every fence post a tether to a legacy my grandfather had carved out with his own calloused hands. The new fence was for Emma's goats, a way to give her something to care for, something to help us both heal. But as I set the final post, I heard the sharp click of high heels on gravel behind me, a sound so out of place it made my shoulders tense that I turned to see a woman in her late 20s approaching, her stride deliberate, like she was inspecting a crime scene. She wore a white t-shirt with a pink heart emblazoned across the chest, paired with a knee-length floral skirt that screamed money. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection despite the Texas heat, and her jewelry, rings, bracelets, a necklace, glinted like she'd raided a boutique. Her eyes scanned my property with cold precision, lingering on the new fence, the barn, the distant cattle grazing in the pasture. She pulled a clipboard from an oversized designer purse, her movements practiced, like she'd done this 100 times. "Excuse me," she called, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning quiet. "I'm Jessica Thompson, president of the Pine Hill Ranch Estates Homeowners Association. I need to discuss this fence situation with you immediately." I set down my post-hole digger and walked over, wiping sweat from my brow. "Ma'am, I'm Luke Harrison," I said, keeping my tone even, the way my father taught me to handle neighbors, even the ones who showed up looking for a fight. Jessica flipped through the papers on her clipboard with the efficiency of a bureaucrat. "Mr. Harrison, all properties that affect the visual appeal of our community must comply with HOA standards. This rustic fence design doesn't match our established aesthetic guidelines." She spat the word rustic like it was a curse, her knuckles widening as she gripped the clipboard. I crossed my arms, leaning back slightly. "Mrs. Thompson, this ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. It was here long before your subdivision was even a blueprint." For a fleeting moment, something flickered in her eyes, fear, maybe, or uncertainty, before her polished mask snapped back into place. "We'll see about that, Mr. Harrison," she said, scribbling furiously on her clipboard. "The HOA has certain rights and responsibilities to maintain property values for all residents." Her pen scratched with unnecessary force, like she was carving her words into stone. "I'll be in touch soon." As she turned to leave, Emma came bounding around the corner of the house, her backpack bouncing as she headed for the school bus stop. Jessica froze, her gaze locking onto my daughter. For a heartbeat, her cold demeanor melted, replaced by something softer, almost wistful, her hand drifting to her stomach like she was reaching for a memory. But then Emma got closer, and the faint smell of livestock carried on the breeze. Jessica's face hardened, the vulnerability gone like a door slamming shut. "Honey," she said, addressing Emma directly, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "doesn't this smell bother you? The odor from these animals is going to make the whole neighborhood less pleasant to live in." Emma's face crumpled, confusion and hurt flashing in her eyes as she glanced between Jessica and me, like she'd done something wrong. That look on my daughter's face, combined with the calculated cruelty in Jessica's words, lit a fire in my chest, something protective and dangerous. I stepped forward, placing myself between them. "Mrs. Thompson, I think this conversation is over," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, steady tone that anyone who knows me recognizes as a warning. Jessica took a step back, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "This isn't finished, Mr. Harrison. Not by a long shot." She clicked back down the driveway, leaving Emma and me in a cloud of dust. As Emma climbed onto the school bus, I stood there, staring at the new fence, replaying Jessica's words. But it wasn't her threats that burned, it was the way she'd made Emma feel ashamed of our home, our life. I watched Jessica's white BMW disappear toward Pine Hill Ranch Estates, and I knew she'd picked the wrong man to push. 3 days later, I found an official violation notice taped to my front door. The paper was crisp, expensive letterhead, demanding a $2,500 fine for the unauthorized fence. But it was the final line that made my blood run cold. Continued violations may result in property seizure proceedings. I read it twice, then laughed, though the sound was more anger than amusement. Either Jessica had no clue what she was talking about, or she was betting I didn't know my rights. I could picture her crafting this notice, sitting at a pristine dining table, legal websites open on her laptop, choosing words designed to intimidate. Her signature at the bottom was bold, written with the confidence of someone who thought they'd already won. That evening, I dug through my father's old office, pulling out a dusty box of property documents. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, tax records, and, most importantly, the original deed to our 40 acres, signed in 1962. This ranch predated Pine Hill by half a century, meaning the HOA had no more authority over my land than they did over the stars. I made copies of everything and sat down to write a response that would leave no room for misunderstanding. The next morning, I drove to Jessica's house, a sprawling 2-story colonial that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not rural Texas. The lawn was manicured to perfection, every shrub trimmed like it had been measured with a ruler. When Jessica opened the door, she was in yoga pants and another designer t-shirt, her hair still flawless at 8 a.m., like she'd been up worrying about my next move. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice laced with fake courtesy that barely hid her smugness. That I handed her an envelope with my response and copies of the deed. "Mrs. Thompson, you might want to review these before this goes any further. You'll see my ranch isn't under HOA jurisdiction, and any attempt to fine me or threaten seizure could be actionable under state harassment laws." She barely glanced at the papers before shoving them back at me, like they were meaningless. "Mr. Harrison, I don't think you understand how things work around here," she said, her tone sharpening. "My husband, Brian, has connections throughout this county, and the HOA has rights that extend beyond property lines." The mix of arrogance and desperation in her voice told me she'd used this script before, probably on neighbors less stubborn than me. Within a week, her harassment campaign kicked into high gear. County inspectors started showing up, environmental health, building codes, you name it. Each one left empty-handed, shaking their heads at the waste of time, but I documented every visit, every complaint. The breaking point came when I got home from work to find Emma crying in the kitchen. "Dad, Mrs. Thompson called the school today," she said, her voice trembling. "She told them I might be living in unsanitary conditions because of the animals. They asked me all these questions about our house, if I felt safe. My 12-year-old shouldn't have to endure that." Jessica had crossed a line, using my daughter as a pawn in her vendetta. That night, I called my neighbor Helen McCarthy, who'd lived next to our ranch for 20 years. "Luke, Jessica's been going door to door with a petition," Helen whispered. "She's telling people your cattle will tank property values. Most folks aren't buying it, but she's got a few signatures from new residents who don't know better. Half the HOA board thinks she's gone too far, but they're scared to stand up to her." The next morning brought a new blow, a notice from the county planning office about a petition to rezone my property from agricultural to residential only. The hearing was set for the following month, and if it passed, I'd lose the agricultural tax exemption that made it possible to keep 40 acres. Without it, I'd be forced to sell, and I had no doubt Brian Thompson's development company was waiting to swoop in at a bargain price. Sitting in my truck, looking out over the pasture where my family had worked for decades, the anger that had been simmering since Jessica's first visit hardened into something else: resolve. If she thought she could erase my family's legacy with legal tricks, she was about to learn what happens when you corner a Harrison. That I took a day off from my landscape design business and marched into the county planning office with a briefcase full of documents. Pete Rodriguez, the commissioner handling zoning, looked uneasy when I sat across from his desk. "Luke, this petition has some heavy backing," he said, sliding a folder toward me. Brian Thompson's company submitted a full development plan for the area, claiming it's in the public interest. The folder contained glossy renderings of luxury homes and parks, but the fine print revealed the truth. Thompson Development had options on 3 neighboring properties, contingent on my land being rezoned. It was a textbook squeeze play. "Pete, how many other farms have they done this to?" I asked. His silence was answer enough. "I can't discuss ongoing investigations," he said finally, "but you're not the first to raise concerns." For the next 2 weeks, I prepared for the hearing like my life depended on it, because it did. I dug up records proving continuous agricultural use since the 1940s, studied zoning laws until I could recite them, and reached out to other ranchers who'd fought similar battles. They told me bullies like the Thompsons usually fold when faced with real resistance. The hearing was held in the county courthouse on a Thursday evening, packed with residents, some curious, some angry. Jessica arrived with an entourage, including a high-priced Dallas lawyer who looked like she charged by the minute. Brian Thompson sat in the front row, scrolling through his phone, like this was just another deal. Jessica's presentation was slick, all about community standards and property values, complete with charts claiming livestock lowered home prices. "We're not trying to harm Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "We're asking for fairness." When my turn came, I stood slowly, looking at faces I'd known my whole life. My grandfather bought this land in 1942, working double shifts to pay for it. My father raised his family here, and I've done the same, paying taxes, supporting this community. This ranch was here before the HOA, before the Thompsons. I laid out the deed and historical records. This isn't about zoning or values. It's about a developer forcing out long-time residents for profit. Thompson Development has done this in 3 other counties, pushing families off their land with the same tactics. Jessica leapt up, her face red. "That's false. We're building a better community." Her outburst drew uneasy glances from the crowd, and even her lawyer looked annoyed. Commissioner Sarah Walsh spoke up. "Given the conflicting information, we're postponing a decision for 30 days. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a loss." As people left, several Pine Hill residents approached me, apologetic. "Luke, Jessica said you were planning commercial farming," one said. "I didn't know this was about forcing you out." Jessica's support was cracking. I caught sight of her by her car, crying alone, Brian already gone. For a moment, I almost pitied her, then I remembered Emma's tears. That night, I pored over old survey maps and found a gem, a 1943 livestock easement granting cattle passage through what was now Pine Hill. It was still valid, never challenged. I laughed, loud enough to wake the house. Jessica had no idea who she was up against. I called Jake Martinez, an agricultural lawyer known for creative solutions. "Luke, this easement is gold," he said. "We can protect your ranch and maybe even expand the agricultural zone." While Jake built the legal case, I rallied local ranchers, who loaned me cattle for an educational grazing project, to assert the easement. Emma was thrilled but worried. "What if Mrs. Thompson gets madder?" she asked. I hugged her. "Let her. We're fighting for our home." The grazing project launched a week later, with 30 head of cattle moving through Pine Hill under the easement. Residents watched, some amused, some annoyed, but the point was made: this land had history. Jessica tried one last move, filing a complaint about disruptive livestock, but Jake countered with the easement, and the county dismissed it. At the rescheduled hearing, we presented the easement, historical records, and testimonials from ranchers. Jessica's lawyer looked defeated, and Brian didn't even show. The commissioners voted unanimously to deny the rezoning. Pine Hill residents later voted Jessica out as HOA president. Emma got her goats, and we kept our land. Jessica and Brian moved away within a year, their development plans stalled. I still walk the hills sometimes, feeling Sarah's presence, knowing we held the line for our family's legacy.